All right, I'm just going to talk through some things, all right? This is posted. I realized I must have gotten my attention called away, and I never finished question B on number 1 on factoring, so I just did it there. It's not on the actual document. I just forgot to do it. But there's 14 questions tomorrow on your quiz test. If you guys know what you're doing, that is more than enough time. But if you don't know how to attack these problems, then yes, you may run out of time. All right, there's probably, yeah.
It's the whole class
period. The whole class period. As soon as you walk in, we're going to start. Out of the 14, I don't know, maybe there's 6 that say specifically how to solve. So this one's solved by factoring. This one's solved by completing the square. This one's solved by quadratic, whatever. And then the rest of them are going to just say solve, and you have to determine what is the best thing to do. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about how we can attempt these problems in a manner that will be time saving. What is the easiest and the first thing you should try to do if it just says solve? You should try to factor, all right? Let's not forget how to factor, guys. When you factor, you move everything to one side, set it equal to 0. Look for a GCF, all those sorts of things. So like in this first set of problems here, it tells you to solve by factoring. If your equation is not set equal to 0, move everything to one side and set it equal to 0. A lot of you had questions or made a mistake on something like letter C. If you have 6x squared minus 4x equals 0, we don't move 4x to the other side, then divide and all that stuff. Guys, if you're going to solve this, what's the first thing you look to take out? Okay, take out the GCF. You have 2x, and then you're left with what? 3x minus 2, and then you set each of those equal to 0. You get 2x equals 0, 3x minus 2 equals 0. So x equals 0, x equals 2/3. That is not a problem that is meant to be confusing. That's meant to be anything out of the ordinary. It's just a basic factoring problem. If you come to something like D, a lot of you went 36 times 49 and got a ginormous number. And you said, give me a break. I can't believe she gave us something like this. Guys, what did I tell you? When you multiply A times C and you get something really big, that should set off bells and whistles. That should be something special. This could be a perfect square trinomial. We learned about this. We reviewed this weeks ago, but that's not going to go away. Guys, what times what gives you 36x squared? 6x, 6x. What times what gives you a positive 49? 7 and 7. How do we figure out if something is a perfect square trinomial? Multiply 6x times 7 times how many? 2, because you'd have 2 of them. What's 6x times 7 times 2? It's 84. So is this a perfect square trinomial? Yes. So what does your binomial look like? Well, 6x is in the front, 7's in the back. What sign is in the middle? Plus, and there's how many of them? 2. So you set that equal to 0 and solve. So some of you did this, and then you got x equals what? Negative 7 over 6. And you said, well, wait a second. I don't know why, because I'm about to say something about it too. God bless you. You said, I got only one answer, and I should have how many? God bless you. 2. Well, guys, think about it. How many 6x plus 7s do you have? Okay, so you did get the same answer twice. That's called multiplicity. We'll talk about that later on. But you don't let things that we've already talked about. This isn't like other subjects where we're going to move on to something else. We are always going to come back to the same basics with factoring, with simplifying, all those sorts of things. So you cannot just forget that part of math. Very important. Yeah.
So on the test, if you want to write it twice?
No, you just write it once. That's fine. Sure. All right. So now if we come to completing the square. Mechanically, you guys are pretty good at completing the square, but there's some things you have to remember. First of all, when you complete the square, your A term has to be what? What kind of one? Positive 1. If it's not, we need to divide. If it's negative, divide everything by a negative. If it's a -3, divide everything by a -3. But you have to make sure your A term is a positive 1 before you start completing the square. Guys, remember, if I have a -7 and I move it to the other side of the equal sign, my -7 becomes what? If I move -7 from one side of the equal sign to the other, It becomes positive. Stuff like that you've got to remember. Priscilla, question.
It was about 1D.
Yep.
And it's not two answers because it's a perfect square triangle.
You have two answers. You have negative 7/6 twice. Because if you were to solve each of these parentheses, you'd have 6x plus 7 equals 0 and 6x plus 7 equals 0, right? So x here would be negative 7/6 and x here would be negative 7/6.
So we just write it once.
You could just write it once. If you want to write it twice, you can. What that means, and you don't need to know this now, but this is a parabola. It's a quadratic. So when you have the same answer twice, instead of going through the x-axis, it hits the x-axis and turns. That's what gives it the shape of a U, or a parabola. But again, you don't need to know now. Valerie, question? Okay, perfect. Okay, let's talk a little bit here. Just basic things. Plus or minus square root of 2 over square root of 3. Done? No, what do we have to do? Square root of 3, top and bottom. We got to rationalize. So plus minus square root of 6 over 3. Done. Yes? Okay. Can I leave this? Why not? Because you got to simplify. You have to break down. Can you leave a fractional answer like this? No. No. What is 9 over 3? 3. Do not leave things that can be simplified unsimplified. You will get points off. Those 3 things right there could be the difference between an A and a B. 2 points here, 3 points there, 2 points here. Some of you really need all of those little points, so make sure you're just paying attention. All right, let's look at another way that we could solve. Solve by using square root. When do we use the square root? Okay, think about it. You have a binomial that is squared set equal to a number. What do you guys notice about B and C? Is the binomial squared all by itself? No. You cannot just take the square root from that point. What do you have to do first? Divide by 3. In C, what do we have to do first? Divide by 4. All right, guys, there's going to be some negatives on your test tomorrow. Should you ever get a negative underneath the radical right now? No. You should not be getting a negative underneath the radical. You should, yeah, no problem. You should not get a negative underneath the radical. If you did, you missed a sign somewhere. So just go back and check. But if you have a situation where you have a binomial squared that is set equal to a number, isolate that binomial, get it by itself, and then take the square root. If you have something like this, what was it? I think one of the questions on the test or the quiz, negative 5x squared plus 12 equals 0. It just says to solve. So the first thing you should do is try to do what? Try to factor it. Is there a GCF? No. Is there a difference of squares? No. So this isn't going to factor. But you notice, guys, you have just x squared. You don't have a b term. You just have x squared. So you can isolate it. When we isolate it, it has to be by itself completely. So I first need to subtract the 12. So negative 5x squared equals negative 12, right? Is x squared by itself yet? No, it's not by itself yet. What do I need to do to get that all by itself? Divide by what? Negative 5, thank you, sir. So now I have x squared equals, what's a negative divided by a negative? A positive, so I have 12 over 5. Does that simplify at all? Can I simplify that at all? No, Bruce, you with me? So now I need to do what to get x? I got to take the square root. Thank you, sir. So I have x equals plus or minus the square root of 12 over the square root of 5. Can I leave my answer like that? No. What do I have to do with the square root of 5? We got to rationalize first. Let's rationalize first. So x equals plus or minus, what's 12 times 5? 60. So square root of 60 over 5. And then am I done? No, for the love of God, this problem just keeps going. What do I do with 60? Break it down in 2. 4 times 15. So x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 15 over 5. Between this step here, guys, and this step here, look how many things you have to do. If you stop here, you're barely even halfway. You've got to fully simplify. Anything we've talked about with rationalizing and breaking down radicals, all that stuff from this point forward, you have to do every time. It does not have to tell you, make sure you break down a radical. You have to ask yourself that question every time. All right, so let's look at something like these basic linear ones, solve. Some of you guys got real confused with these because we get a bunch of brackets, bunch of parentheses, that sort of a thing. How do I tell you guys should work? From where? Parentheses. You want to work from the inside out. Do not try to do 3 things in one step. That's where you guys are making a mistake. If you have something like this, everybody look up here. I have x plus 7 minus 2x minus 3. Am I multiplying those 2 parentheses together? No. If they were being multiplied, they would be stuck together. There is a minus sign in there. What number is in front of this minus sign? Yes, so what do I have to do with that? I don't want to factor it. Distribute it. It has to go here and where? And to the second one. Lots of you on the rational one. That looks something like letter C. You forgot to distribute that negative. And what happens was it totally changes the entire problem. It is a big deal. So just make sure you're taking your time. I think there's 2 of those on the test. This should be a gimme. This is super basic, these linear equations. It's just order of operations, but you have to work from the inside out. If you have something like C or D, what do we have to do first with the denominators, guys? You got to factor. You have to factor. Do not leave x squared minus 4 and try to make everything x squared minus 4. You need to factor to see what's going on. Once you factor, please remember, guys, everything is in a parenthesis. So again, you see this minus sign here? When I find my common denominator and I multiply everything together, that negative has to go to everything in that parenthesis. Another thing for a question like this, say the answer you guys get is -2 and you get x equals 0. But a bunch of people make this mistake. You either left both of them, you got points off, or you realized, oh, wait a second, when I plug in -2, this denominator becomes 0, so that one doesn't work, and then you told me no solution. Is there a solution here? Yes, x equals 0. That's a valid solution. You can have one that works and one that doesn't. On the test, I think it says check for extraneous solutions. It's reminding you to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Let's say like one of the denominators is just x and one of the edges was s minus 0.
Uh-huh.
Both of them just be no solution?
Correct. Yes. Okay, so Yara's asking, what would happen if one of my like I got those 2 answers, right? And again, obviously, we're changing the problem, so. All right, so I got these 2 answers. I got x equals -2, and I got x equals 0. So I see, oh, if I plug in -2, my denominator becomes 0. Okay, good, I crossed that one out. But then I notice, oh, wait a second, if I put 0 here, that one doesn't work either. Then that becomes no solution.
But if only one of them works, then
You just cross off the one that doesn't and circle the one that does, yeah. Because the one that doesn't is called extraneous, it's extra. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Okay. Solve using the quadratic formula. We cannot get any more basic than this one, guys. First of all, what do we have to know? The quadratic formula. Very good. As soon as you guys get your test, you should just write it at the top of the paper. Because think about it. If any question says solve, what's the first thing we should try to do? Factor, right? And then if it doesn't factor, you have 2 options. You can complete the square, or you can use what? The quadratic formula. So if you guys choose, and you just want where all it says is solve, doesn't tell you what to do, and you want to use the quadratic formula every time, you can. Just understand that's not the most time-saving method, so you got to be quick. But if it's a quadratic, if it's raised to the second power, you can use the quadratic formula. In a question like A, what do we have to do first before we solve? We got to multiply everything by what? 8. Why? To get rid of denominators. In letter B, what do we need to do? Okay, first, let's talk about that for a second. What do we need to do first? We got to move what? We got to move the 4 over. Everything needs to be on one side, set equal to 0. Now, for something like B or C, if it leads with a negative, I tell you to factor it out, right? You don't want to do anything like if you're completing the square. But with the quadratic formula, can you have a negative a? Absolutely. That's fine. You don't have to factor out the negative if you're going to use the formula. But if you wanted to, can you? Yeah. If I want to divide out a negative, that just means I have to divide a negative from every single thing. So this would become x squared minus 5x minus 12 equals 0. You could do the quadratic formula with that and get the exact same answer. Luna.
For example, if I wasn't using the quadratic formula and I was just trying to factor, and it gives the negative x, can I add the negative at the end? Or do I have
Okay, no, that's a good question too. Okay, let's just say, hold on, we have x squared, what is it? Plus 7x plus 10 equals 0. That's factors, right? 5 and 2. Okay, so guys, say you have this, negative x squared minus 7x minus 10 equals 0. And it says solve. So the first thing we're going to try to do is what? Factor. If I lead with a negative and I'm trying to factor, I'm going to divide it out. So I'm going to take out my negative 1, and I have negative 1, and then I have x squared plus 7x plus 10 equals 0. You guys with me? Okay, so are there factors of 10 that multiply to give me 10 but add to give me 7? Okay, so watch. X plus 2, x plus 5, and we set everything equal to what? 0. Set every piece equal to 0. Do not multiply negative 1 back in. Watch. Negative 1 equals 0. X plus 2 equals 0. X plus 5 equals 0. Is negative 1 equal to 0 ever in the history of the world? Cross it off. Then I have x equals negative 2. I have x equals negative 5. Once you factor out a number, if it has an x attached to it, that's different. But if you just factor out a number, whether it be negative 1, 7, whatever, you have factored out of the entire equation from the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So it's no longer needed. You don't have to multiply it back in. Don't do that. Good question. Yeah. Sure. Jaden, did you have a question?
For the quadratic formula, if you get like a negative this, but let's say you have negative 2, and it's negative b, right? Would those two negatives become a positive?
Correct. I would always, that's a good question too. Like say for this one, like for B, right? A is negative 2, B is negative 3, and C is 4. Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to take my B term and it's negative and the formula is negative, so I'm going to make it a positive, I would write out negative and then write your B term. So you see, oh, negative, negative makes a positive. That's an easy way to not make a mistake. Sure. Yeah.
What should I do if I submitted the review before you put the quadratic formula?
Just do them and then just resubmit. Yeah.
When you're doing the quadratic formula, if you get nothing under the like if your numbers if they subtract to like 0, you just discard it.
Correct. So on WebAssign, some of you got like, I'm just going to make this up, 9 plus or minus the square root of 0 over, say, 4, right? What is the square root of 0? 0. So it's just 9 over 4. You can leave plus or minus 0, but it doesn't mean anything. What that means is there's only one solution. That means like the multiplicity thing where it would touch and go back, like the negative 7 over 6 twice. Same spot. That's what that means.
And then we shouldn't be getting a negative.
No negatives underneath the radical. That'll start Friday. Yeah. That's when we start the imaginary numbers.
Can you go over 2A?
Can I go over 2A? This one.
Yeah.
Okay. So 3x squared. Hi.
Some of this.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so it's 3x squared. Was it plus 5x?
Yeah.
Plus 5x minus 7 equals 0. And we're completing the square?
Yeah.
Okay. So first thing I look at with completing the square is my a term has to be a positive 1, yeah? So let's divide everything by 3. So we have x squared plus 5 over 3x minus 7 over 3 equals 0. All right, so then we're going to move negative 7/3 over. Okay, so x squared plus 5 over 3x plus my big old square. And then when I move negative 7/3 over, it becomes perfect, plus the big old square. All right, so when we complete the square, what do I do with my b term? I have 5/3 divided by 2 over 1, which is the same as multiplying by. Okay, so 5 over 3 times 1/2 gives me 5 over 6, okay? Is that positive or negative? It's positive. So my parenthesis over here is going to be x plus 5 over 6 quantity squared, right? Equals, well, how do I figure out what goes in both of those squares? Square it, okay? So when I square this, it becomes 25 over 36, good. So before I add those two, I have to get common denominator. So what's my common denominator between 36 and 3? 36. What do I have to multiply 3 by to make it 36? 12. So I multiply the bottom by 12. I multiply the top by 12. What's 7 times 12? Uh-huh. So I have 84 plus 25. Again, guys, no shame in writing 84 and 25 and then saying 4 plus 5 is 9. 8, so 109, right? So I have 109 over 36. And now what? Take the square root, good. When I take the square root, what goes in front of my answer? Plus or minus. There's lots of steps to this, guys. So I have plus or minus. Is 109 a perfect square? No. But is 36? Yes. And then what's my last step? So x equals, I like to put the number first, and then my plus or minus, 109 over 6. What do I have to check to make sure 109 doesn't do? Break down, okay? So if I have 109, 2's not going to go into it. What about 3? Why not? Tell me why. Because 9 plus 1 equals 10. Okay, what about 5? 7? No, is anything going to go into 109? So you can just leave it. You can also write it if you want to over one denominator since they both are over 6. Whoops. Created my own numbers like that. Completing the square is not necessarily hard. It's just a long process. So if, sometimes people are like, well, when should I do what? If you have an even b term, like if the number with x is 6, or 12. If it's an even b term, completing the square is pretty easy because you just divide it by 2 and square it. But when it's a fraction, you might want to just, if it just says solve, you might want to just multiply everything to get rid of the denominator and use the quadratic formula. Yes?
Can you go over 4D?
4D. Okay, so look at D. First of all, it's a rational. So when I have a rational, I'm going to say, okay, I have parentheses here, here, and what do I have to do with x squared plus x minus 12? Factor it. So x plus 4, x minus 3, right? So now I have to get a common. What would my common denominator between those two be? Perfect. So my first fraction has the x plus 4. What's it missing? Good. If I multiply the bottom by x minus 3, then I multiply the top, right? So I have 4x times x minus 3 minus. My second fraction has the x minus 3. What's it missing? Do you have to go to the bathroom? No. Okay. Just give me 1 sec then. X plus 4, so I have to multiply the bottom, then the top. So I have x times x plus 4 equals what? Negative 2x. Plus 5. Now that they all have the same denominator, that's when we can say, okay, we don't have to worry about it anymore. We've just created a linear equation. So now we're going to distribute. 4x times x is 4x squared. 4x times negative 3 is negative 12x, right? Negative x times x is negative x squared. Negative x times 4 is minus 4x. And then I have equals negative 2x plus 5. Combine like terms on the left-hand side. So 4x squared minus 1x squared is 3x squared. Good. I have a negative 12x and a negative 4 gives me negative 16x. Good. Equals negative 2x plus 5. Now, if I had just x to the first power on either side, you just move x's to one side, numbers to the other. But since I have a quadratic, I have an x squared and an x. That means we got to move everything to one side. and hope that it factors. And if it doesn't, then, you know, quadratic formula, whatever. But when I move this over, I'm going to say plus 2x and minus 5. So plus 2x and minus 5. You with me? So 3x squared. Negative 16 plus 2 gives me negative 14x, good, minus 5 equals 0. We haven't even figured out what x equals, but we're getting there. So let's try to do what first? Let's try to factor. So I have 3 times negative 5. What are the factors of negative 15? That'll multiply to give me negative 15, but add to give me a negative 14. Negative 15 and 1. Now, Yara, how do you like to factor? My way with the dividing by the a term? Okay. So I have x minus 15 times x plus 1. Right? But what do I have to do? Divide by the a term. Good, which is 3. So I'm left here with x minus 5 and 3x plus 1. So then we come out with x equals 5 and x equals negative 1/3. Whew. Now what do I need to do just to make sure? I got 2 answers. Do either of them make my denominator 0? Nope, so you're good. On the test, it says for the rationals, check for extraneous solutions. That means plug it back in and see if the denominator becomes 0. Priscilla. Six equals 7 over 2x minus 1. Okay. So how do we solve this? What would your common denominator be? Correct. So my 6 needs what? It needs them 2 times, right? What does my 7 need? Just one of them? So this looks like this. 6 times 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1 equals 7 times 2x minus 1 plus 3. You with me? All right, so let's FOIL first. I have my 6 out here. 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1 is going to give you 4x squared minus 4x plus 1, right? And then over here I have 14x minus 7 plus 3. Okay, so if we distribute that 6, I have 24x squared minus 24x plus 6 equals 14x minus 4. All right, so it's a quadratic, right? I can't just move x's to one side, numbers to the other. So let's move everything to the left-hand side. Let's subtract 14x and add 4. So minus 14x and plus 4 is going to give me 24x squared minus 38x plus 10 equals 0. All right, so if we're going to try and factor this, before you multiply 24 times 10 and get 240, what do you notice you can take out? I can take out a 2. All right, when I take out a 2, my numbers become a little more manageable. I have 12x squared minus, what's 38 divided by 2? 19. And then plus 5 equals 0. So now you can factor. Factors of 60. So factors of 60 that multiply to give you a positive 60, but add to give you a negative 19. Negative 15, good, and negative 4. Right? Negative times negative is a positive, and then negative plus a negative is going to give me my negative, and then you would just factor it. So you have your 2 out here. Do you like to do it my shortcut way or the grouping way? Okay. So you have x minus 15 and x minus 4. And then I have to divide both of my terms by what? No. What's your a term here? By 12, yeah. So your 2 is still hanging out here out in front. So what can I simplify here with 15 and 12? They both are divisible by 3, right? So x minus 5 over 4. And then this becomes x minus 1 over 3 equal to 0. In a second, yeah. I was just simplifying the fraction, so. So now, yes, these both become coefficients. So it's 2 times 4x minus 5 times 3. Ooh, that's gross. 3x minus 1 equals 0. So now set each piece equal to 0. When I say 2 equals 0, is that ever true? No. And then when I solve this, negative 5 goes to the other side, becomes positive. You divide by 4, so x equals 5/4. And then move negative 1 to the other side, it becomes positive, so you get x equals 1/3. It's a long problem. I understand that.
Can you just immediately and then also, instead of moving the denominator to the coefficient.
Yep, you can just solve.
When you do the quadratic formula, and you get like the number on the outside negative and then the denominator negative, you cancel out, right?
Yeah, negative divided by negative would be positive, yeah. What else? You guys are uber prepared for this. Yes, sir.
So for B, I could, if I didn't distribute the negative at the start, well, if I did distribute the negative at the start.
Wait,
we'll take
for
it
here,
out.
take it out, okay.
Yeah, if I took it out, and I got negative 3 plus minus square root of 41 over 4 instead of negative 4 on the bottom and positive 3 on the top, is that fine?
Anything else?
Are you gonna post any more practice stuff, or are you just like
If you go to WebAssign, go to the textbook, click on the 1.4 exercises, there's like 60 questions. Also, the 1.2 has the linear ones and the rational ones.
Could you